Clifford. Welcome to ACDC Econ. So in this quick video, I'm going to cover everything you need for an introductory macroeconomics class or an AP math. It's a great way to review what you know and don't know by watching the entire class over again. You can spot the things that you have to go back and study. And if you've been watching my videos, it's something to produce, or any decision you make has a cost. Now, those concepts come together with the production possibilities curve. It's the first graph you learn in economics. It shows the different combinations of producing two different goods using all of your resources. So any point on the curve is efficient, like you're using all of your resources.
Oh my god!
Any point inside the curve is inefficient. Any point out here, outside the curve, is impossible given your current resources. And there's two different shapes you have to remember. If it's a straight line production possibilities curve, that means there's constant opportunity cost, which means the resources to produce the different products are very similar. So similar resources, if it's a straight line. If it's a bowed out line, concave to the origin, that means the resources are not very similar.
I know. I'm sorry, Mr. Clifford. I know.
The idea that countries should specialize in the product where they have a lower opportunity cost. So if you're producing one thing and I'm producing something else, if I can produce at a lower opportunity cost than you, I should produce this, you should produce another thing, and then we should trade. Now there's two different things you gotta remember: absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Absolute advantage is a joke. It's easy. You just figure out who produces more. That means they have an absolute advantage. Comparative advantage requires you to do some calculations, or the quick and dirty if you saw my unit summary video, and it tells you who should have more. Now another thing you have to learn is in terms of trade, which means how many units of one product should they trade?
Bro, we know. What is this video?
Like the free market system, capitalism, and the idea of a command economy and a mixed economy. We're going to focus on capitalism in this class, and so you learn the circular flow model. The circular flow model shows you that there's businesses and individuals and the government and how they interact with each other. Just remember, businesses both sell and buy two different things. They sell products and they buy resources. So there's a product market and a resource market. And individuals, you and me, we buy products and we sell our resources. And the government another thing you're going to learn here is the vocab, like transfer payments. This is when the government pays individuals like welfare, but it's not to buy anything. It's just to provide some public service. And you also learn the idea of subsidies, when the government provides businesses money to produce more. And also you're going to talk about the idea of factor payments. So individuals sell their resources and businesses pay the factor payments to those individuals. Now, Unit 1 sets the foundation for everything you're going to be doing later on. You start with demand and supply. Remember, demand is a downward sloping curve that shows you the law of demand. When price goes up, people buy less of stuff. Right? When price goes down, people buy more. That's the idea of price and quantity demanded. There's also a law of supply. When the price goes up, people produce more. Price goes down, people produce less, right?
Really? Really?
Price goes down, supply goes down. Now, together, they form equilibrium. Please note, if price goes up, there is no shift. Price does not shift the curve. It just
We know.
on the curve.
We know.
There's shortage when the price
Peter,
goes
we
up,
know.
or a surplus when the price
Peter.
is higher. You should also understand
Lois.
when there's actual individual
Fuck.
shifts. So there's
No.
demand can go up, demand can go down, supply can go up, or supply can go down. And you just watch the graph, draw the graph, tells you exactly what happens to price and quantity every single time.
Uh-huh.
In macroeconomics class, you go to a lot more detail.
You're so right, Mr. Clifford.
And ceilings and floors and all sorts of crazy other stuff. But you don't need to understand those concepts for most macroeconomics classes. Just understand where equilibrium comes from, what happens when demand shifts right or left, when supply shifts left or right, and understand the idea of shortage and surplus. That's usually enough. And you add on that concept when you learn about aggregate demand, aggregate supply later on in Unit 3. Overall, I give Unit 1 5 out of 10 difficulty.
Bro, I give you the 1 or 2 on difficulty.
You gotta cover production possibilities curves.
It's not like physics where everything is based off Unit 1. Actually, it is.
In the rest of the course. Here we go. Now we're going to jump into full macroeconomics. We talk about the macro measures. In Unit 2, we're talking about the 3 goals of every economy. Doesn't matter what kind of economy it is, they have 3 goals. They want to grow over time. They want to produce more stuff. They want to keep unemployment down, like limit unemployment. They want to limit inflation, or at least keep prices stable. That's what you do in this unit. You cover each one of these concepts. How do you measure these different things? And what are the issues with those measurements? And then we move on and apply that stuff in later units. So it starts off. Growth is the idea the economy is expanding over time.
I'm not cussing. I'm not cussing.
The entire course is GDP, gross domestic product. It's the dollar value of all final goods produced in a year in a country's border. So anything you produce in your own country. Now you should also understand the idea of GDP per capita, which is the GDP divided by population, and get good at doing percent change. So if I say the GDP in 1 year is this amount, and the GDP in another year is a different amount, you should be able to calculate the percent change in the GDP. Now when it comes to GDP, it's important to know it's not included in GDP. The first one is intermediate goods. These are goods that go into the production.
This is important.
So we
Well, actually, this is
Are not the things that went
simple,
into
but
producing.
this is
The
important.
laptop, not the computer chip that the laptop producer bought from another company.
Yes,
So
yes.
intermediate goods don't count. Also, we don't count non-production transactions. These are situations where nothing new is produced. So stocks and bonds, they don't count in GDP because we have to count things that are goods and services
Yes.
provided in that year. Nothing old, nothing counted in previous years, that doesn't count towards GDP. And the last one is non-market transactions. So illegal goods or illegal labor, those don't count in GDP either. And there's two ways to calculate GDP, even though the most important one for our purposes is usually the expenditures approach. But there's also the income approach. The expenditure approach adds up all
My
the spending
packages.
on all goods and services in the economy, and that tells you how much we produce in a given year. The income approach adds up all the income.
I'm sorry, I'm skipping this. This is simple.
Because that's adjusting for
This is also simple.
Eventually, over time, the economy moves towards a recession, and it falls down to a trough, and then it goes into expansion, goes right back up. The economy goes up and down over time, and that tells you there's only three places the economy can be at any given period of time. We can be at full employment. This is the idea that the economy is doing great, GDP is up, real GDP is moving nice and steady. We can have a recession, right? This is a recessionary gap, where the economy is not doing well, we have very high unemployment, and we have something called an inflationary gap, when the economy is kind of overheating and we're having more and more inflation. You're going to see those concepts later on as well. And that leads to the second goal of every economy, to limit unemployment. Now, unemployment is the idea of people who are looking for work that can't find it, who are in the labor force. Remember, it's not by population. It's the number of people who are not working, who are actively looking, divided by the labor force times 100 gives you a percentage. That percentage, the number of people who are unemployed in the economy. There's also the labor force participation rate. And understand the idea of labor force is the group of people who can and are able and are willing to work above 16, not institutionalized, not in jail. And at this point, you're going to look at the three types of unemployment. There's
This is what I was
people
gonna look
between
for.
jobs, and they're looking for jobs. There's structural, when people are replaced by robots.
Wait.
The skills that people actually want, or that
Clifford.
employers want. So there's skillful employment. There's
Frictional, which includes seasonal, structural, and cyclical, which I forgot what it is. So.
Because no one's buying products, so people don't need resources. They don't need the workers.
Oh.
In the economy, whether it's good or bad, there's always going to be two types of unemployment: frictional and structural. And that's the goal. Remember, the goal is not to have 0% unemployment. The goal is to have just frictional and structural unemployment. So in the United States, it's about 5% unemployment.
Woo.
That's called the natural rate of unemployment.
Frictional plus structural unemployment is while it's healthy, and then includes cyclical. That's when we know we're in a recession.
And of course, the unemployment rate.
What was this?
Cyclical unemployment. And of course, the unemployment rate also has some critical unemployment. And of course, the other gap, we also have cyclical unemployment.
I'm in a rush. I can't be doing this. Discouraged workers, we know. Unemployed workers, underemployed workers, we know. Literally, just to underemployed, they're people who work like 1 hour a week, and they're not getting more hours, but they're still considered employed. And then a discouraged worker, some people that are no longer looking for a job. So that means they're no longer part of the workforce or labor force.
There's one more goal of every economy: to keep prices stable, to limit crazy inflation. Remember, inflation is the idea that money loses its purchasing power, right? So it requires more money to buy the same number of goods before when there's more inflation. We have inflation. There's also deflation when prices are falling, and disinflation when the economy, when the inflation rate's actually falling. So inflation rate's been going up for a long time, and the inflation rate's going up by less and less. That's called disinflation. You should understand the idea of nominal and real wages. If, let's say your boss gave you a 5% raise, you're like, yeah, great. My nominal wage increased. My nominal wage went up by 5%.
Inflation rate.
But if you have 10% inflation, then in real life, your real wage fell by 5%. So you have to understand the idea that, nominal.
I don't know any of the equations.
And then real
Actually, that's not true.
It's the
I
same
know
thing
some of them.
with
I know
interest rates.
like
If inflation
30,
goes up,
40%
that's
of
going
them,
to
but
decrease the real interest rate, right? That's the idea of, unexpected inflation, which hurts lenders. And it's the idea of six changes of no tracker. So it's at a number. 100%, since probably one of the hardest concepts in this unit is the idea of the deflator. The deflator conceptually is really easy. It's like the CPU's concept.
Mr. Lee, what are we doing in the market basket?
So instead of just the things that consumers don't really buy, but the businesses would buy,
They're the.
and it looks at the prices of everything in the economy.
I'm crashing out.
Deflates GDP.
Not because I don't like Jacob Clifford. Jacob Clifford, you're an amazing guy. Mr. Lee, you should make YouTube videos. You know, pull the Dr. Elderstrat. Sergio Gonzalez has sent me a message, and I can't respond to it because I'm recording on my phone.
GDP times 100. Again, it's a number. It's an index number that tells you how prices change relative to some base here. You definitely want to do some calculations.
Look, he's so much younger here.
On doing this later. And the last concept you're going to learn in this unit is the causes of inflation. Inflation happens for three reasons. The first one is when the government just prints a bunch of money, and you learn something called the quantity theory of money. It's an identity that shows you M times V equals P times Y. Now, what does that mean? M is the amount of money in the money supply. V is the velocity of money. It's how much time money is spent or how many times money is spent and respent in a given period of time. P is the prices of everything.
That's actually really important because I forgot this.
So P times Y is the nominal GDP. So this Kennedy says the amount of money that's out there times how many times people spend that money over and over again equals the nominal GDP. Now it's important because it shows you when
nominal.
you increase the money supply.
Oh, frick, I thought it was real.
And why the output stays the same. You're going to have an equivalent change in prices. So if money supply goes up by 10%, prices are going to go up exactly by 10%. And the other two causes of inflation are actually super simple. The first one's called demand pull. This is the idea of demand goes up. People want to buy a lot more stuff in your country. And people bid up the price for it. So demand pulls up prices. The other one is called
cost push.
Cost push is the idea that there's some resource cost or we ran out of some key resource to produce stuff that caused production costs to rise. So now it costs more to produce stuff, so we produce less stuff, causing prices to go up.
So basically, if wood just ceases to exist, and we only have X amount of wood, which can make X amount of tables, that would mean inflation, because tables would cost more.
So either demand to go up, but the concepts you
I would say Unit 2, okay, Unit 1, it's only difficult because, no, it's not even difficult. Unit 1 is like a 3. Unit 2 is like a 6. I don't think Unit 2 is easier than Unit 1. I don't agree with this. Mr. Lee, tell Mr. Clifford. Frick. Mr. Lee, tell Jacob Clifford that this is wrong. Yeah.
There's so much stuff you gotta learn.
I agree.
It starts off with the idea of aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is all the stuff that people want to buy in the economy at different price levels. And it's got a downward sloping demand curve, just like a market demand curve, except now instead of price, it's price level. It's the price level. And
I would hope I know this because it's one of our graphs that I do get good.
This is downward sloping
I'm
for
the
three
goat.
reasons. You need to understand the three reasons. First is the wealth effect. The idea that when price level goes up, the assets in people's banks are worth less, right? Now I can't buy as much as before, and so when price level goes up, people buy less stuff. And the opposite as well, price level goes down, people buy more stuff. There's also the interest rate effect. When inflation happens, interest rates tend to go up, and so people would take out less loans. Again, these are the reasons why the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. The last reason is because the foreign trade effect. This is the idea that when price level goes up, people from other countries don't want to buy your stuff, and so quantity demand again goes down. Just like a market demand curve, the aggregate demand curve can shift and increase to the right, a decrease to the left, and the shifters are really simple. Anything that changes what people want to buy. So if other countries, or if there's more investments, or if there's more consumer spending, any of those things can shift the aggregate demand either right or left. There's also an aggregate supply curve, which is upward sloping in the short run. That means that when price level goes up, producers want to produce more stuff. But there's also a long run graph. This is the idea of, in the long run, we'll produce the same exact.
Gov was so much more enjoyable.
The idea of full employment GDP. And the long run aggregate supply shows
Gov,
there's no relationship between price level and the real GDP we're actually producing.
It was so.
In other words, when in the long
like
run,
even the test. I had fun during the test. I'm not gonna have fun during this test, Mr. Lee.
Now, both the short run aggregate supply and the long run aggregate supply.
Like, I'm really not. I'm not looking forward to this. Respectfully, of course. You are a very good teacher. I love the way you teach. I just think the subject of AP macroeconomics was not for me. AP Gov, I liked. And I think that reflected in my test score.
Another key
Singular.
concept to watch out
Not
for
my
again
test
is
scores, my
stagflation.
single test
Ag
score that
supply
I did
shifts to
get
the
on.
left, prices
I have not had
go
that
down.
revelation
Just
with
like
this
the worst case
with this
scenario, we have inflation
class.
and low output, which is bad.
I know what
Now, another thing
stagflation
to be able
is.
to do here is show what happens in the
I
long
know.
run. In other words,
I know
when
what
there's
these
an event
graphs
that
are.
occurs, how do you go from the short run back to the long run? If consumers
I
want
don't
more
know.
stuff, average demand goes up, right? That leads to an inflationary gap. But in the long run, wages will go up, cost of firms will go up, and the short ag supply will shift back to the left and put us back in the long run. It goes the same way for recessionary gap. Assume the economy's at full employment. If consumption goes down, people buy less stuff. We end up with a recessionary gap. Then what happens? Well, if wages are flexible, which is debatable, if wages are flexible, eventually prices have to get back in the long run. It goes the same way for recessionary gap. Assume the economy's at full employment. If consumption goes down, people buy less stuff. We end up with a recessionary gap.
That makes sense. Okay.
Then what happens? Well, if wages are flexible, which is debatable, if wages are flexible, eventually prices will fall for reasonable.
Remember, ceteris paribus until told otherwise.
Wages
remember that.
And then costs will fall for firms, so firms can produce more. Ag supply shifts to right, boom, right back to the long run. And that's creating the long run aggregate supply curve. That long run adjustment is different than economic growth. Economic growth is the idea of GDP going up in the long run. In other words, when there's an increase in investment, there'd be more capital, so aggregate demand would shift to the right. And since we can produce more stuff, short run ag supply would shift to the right.
No, I guess this isn't common sense, but
and you've seen this before with the production possibilities curve.
Yeah.
The production possibilities curve shifting to the right is like the long run ag supply curve shifting to the right. We can produce more stuff that we couldn't produce before. That's economic growth. Before you get too excited that you can draw the concepts on one graph, keep in mind there's another graph you have to be able to show recessionary gap, inflationary gap, and full employment. It's called the Phillips curve. The relationship between inflation and unemployment. In the short run, there's a downward sloping relationship. In other words, a negative relationship between these two things. Either you get high inflation or high unemployment, but usually don't happen at the same time. And in the long run, it's vertical. There's no relationship between inflation and unemployment in the long run. So with these two graphs, you should be able to show when the economy is at full employment, when it has an inflationary gap, when it has a recessionary gap, or when there's a shift in the short run ag supply curve and how that shifts the short run Phillips curve. The next thing you're going to learn in this unit is the idea of fiscal policy, which is that shifts the short run Phillips curve. The next thing you're going to learn in this unit is the idea of fiscal policy, which is the change in government spending and taxes. So when the economy is doing poorly, how do we fix the economy? Expansionary fiscal policy is when we increase government spending or cut taxes, and there's contractionary fiscal policy where you increase taxes or decrease government spending. And one of the last concepts you're going to see is the spending multiplier. Spending multiplier is the idea when people spend, that becomes somebody else's income, and then people save a portion of that and they spend the rest. And that spending becomes somebody else's income, keeps happening over and over again. You need to understand the idea of the marginal propensity to consume, which shows you how much people consume of new income. And then there's marginal propensity to save, which is the opposite side, how much people save of new income. Simple spending multiplier is 1 over the marginal propensity to save.
Peter, the horse is here.
This is, if initial
Peter, how are you doing that?
happens, that's going to get multiplied by this amount. That's the total change of spending. After people spend and save, it happens over and over and over again. Right? There's also a tax multiplier, which is one less than the spending multiplier. Again, the math isn't super difficult. It's just something you have to practice to get comfortable with. The last thing in this unit is the idea of the debt, the problems of fiscal policy, right? Increasing government spending and lowering taxes.
I know these definitions.
A bunch of key graphs, a bunch of key concepts.
Valid. Unit 3 is definitely, in my opinion, the hardest unit. Let's move on.
Maybe get slowed down when you talk about the bulk. It's a medium of exchange and why it's better than the barter system. Then you talk about commodity money and fiat money. Commodity money has some sort of intrinsic value. Fiat money does not. And the three functions of money, they are because it shows you when you increase the money supply and velocity stays the same, and why the output stays the same, you're going to have an equivalent 20. Prices went up 20% since the base year. If you see a 200, prices went up since the base year. It's like the government nominal.
I want to see where he just walks in.
The GDP deflators are not going to buy a lot more stuff. We ran out of some key resource to produce stuff that caused the production cost to rise. So now it costs more to produce stuff. So which is the opposite side.
Yeah, I did this.
Fiscal policy, right? Now we talk about the multiple accounts and a store of value.
I'll write this down. This is, well, can it talk about the different kinds of money? Because I always get the two mixed up, and I know it's gonna happen tomorrow. How do I search it up? Yeah. Oh my Gosh, even if I search it up, and I would be pissed because I'm low-key slow and it's gonna blank. Just like everything on New York v. Wainwright. Gideon versus Wainwright. I'm talking to myself, Mr. Lee. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out. Oh frick.
In people's checking accounts, so demand deposits as well. Also understand the idea of the fractional reserve banking, the idea that banks hold a portion of reserves and they loan out the rest of the money.
If I give the bank $100, they keep, I think,
another bank, and the other bank
$10
holds a portion of that money and
and then give the $90 out, and then when that bank gets $90, they save 9, they loan the other 81 out, and so on and so forth.
Reserve ratio, the excess reserves. Required reserves is the amount of money that a bank has to hold by law. Excess reserves,
we're talking about
it. They can loan out if they want to. Now, at this point, you're also going to learn about the money multiplier. We learned about the spending multiplier in Unit 3. Now it's the same idea, except talking about spending and consuming and saving.
This equation makes me joyous because it's so easy.
Ends up in another bank. That bank holds a portion and then loans the rest out. That keeps happening
Literally
over
just
and over
1 over
again.
the reserve requirement.
The multiplier for the money multiplier is right here, 1 over the reserve requirement. Remember, the spending multiplier was 1 over the marginal propensity to save. The money multiplier, 1 over the reserve requirement. Same concept, though. Right? The initial change in money supply times the multiplier shows you the total change in the money supply. Key graph in this unit is the money market graph. It shows a supply and demand for money. You've got interest rates, you've got the quantity of money, it's got a downward sloping demand. Demand for money happens for 2 reasons: transaction demand and asset demand. People need money to buy stuff, and they need money, or they like to have their assets in money as opposed to have their assets in bonds or stocks or something that's not money. So there's demand for money. The supply is vertical. It's set by the Fed, and that comes together and sets the nominal interest rate. Now the Fed can control that money.
Commodity
supply. They can
money.
increase it, shift to the right, and that would lower the interest rate, or they can decrease it, shift it to the left, and they can increase the interest rate. That's called monetary policy. Remember, the Fed controls the money supply. They increase the money supply, lowers interest rates, which would increase investment, consumer spending. People would take out more loans, buy more stuff. That would increase aggregate demand. That's called expansionary monetary policy. If the Fed were decreasing money supply, that would increase interest rates, decrease investment, decrease consumer spending. People would take out less loans because it's more expensive to pay back the loan, and that would decrease aggregate demand. That's called contractionary monetary policy.
I wonder how YouTubers can do this.
Just understand how they shift the money supply. There's 3 shifts:
Hola, pa.
reserve requirement, the discount rate.
Estoy haciendo un video y después voy a ponerme listo.
Discount rate is how much banks are charged by the Fed when they borrow money from the Fed, and then open market operations when the Fed buys or sells. Here's the rules you're going to watch out for. It shows you what happens when the reserve requirement goes up or down, discount rate goes up or down, and when the Fed buys or sells bonds to the money supply. So make sure you memorize this. You got to know this. That right there is monetary policy. Keep in mind there's a difference between the discount rate is what the Fed charges banks, and the federal funds rate is what banks charge each other. So if a bank needs money, they can either go, they can go to the people they lent the money to and say, hey, I will need the money back. That's one option. Or they can go to another bank, or they can go to the Fed. So when they go to the Fed, that's a discount rate. That's what they're charged. When they go to another bank, that's called the federal funds rate. The name's horrible. They should be reversed, right? But just remember, federal funds rate is what banks charge other banks. The next concept you have to understand is the idea of loanable funds. Loanable funds is another key graph that shows the demand and the supply of loans. The demand for loans is by borrowers. These are people who want to borrow money. The supply is by lenders, all the people who want to lend out money. And it gives you the real interest rate. Now, this curve, of course, can shift both supply or demand. For example, if the government does a lot of borrowing, that increases the demand for loans because the government says, hey, I want to borrow some of that. And again, interest rates go up. Now, the graph shows you the concept of crowding out, which I talked about earlier. If the government deficit spends, they demand more money. That increases demand for loans. Higher interest rate, higher real interest rate means less investment and less consumption of things that people would take out loans for. So overall, Unit 4 is pretty hard. I give it an 8 out of 10 difficulty because it has some graphs and it has some calculations, so it's bringing a lot of different concepts together. But it's all talking about one big concept, monetary policy. If you get that, you're going to be fine. Now for the last unit, we're talking about international trade and foreign exchange. It's going to start off with the balance of payments. This shows all the transactions between different countries, and it has 2 different accounts. the current account and the financial account. The current account is made up of, first, the balance of trade. That's the first idea I want you to understand. Exports and imports. If you export more than you import, then you have a trade surplus. If you import more than you export, you have a trade deficit. So the first part that you need to understand is the goods and services that are sold and kept track of in the current account. Now, investment income is also counted in the current account, and so is net transfers. So when one country, gives aid to another country, or remittance, when one person in one country lives there and they send money back to their family, these things all count in the current account. The financial account is basically financial assets. It shows inflow and outflow of money coming in or out of a country. Now, if the inflow into your country is greater than the outflow, that means you have a surplus in the financial account. If outflow is more than the inflow, then you have a deficit in the financial account. Now, keep in mind, when a country has a deficit in the current account, that means they have to have a surplus in the financial account. That's why it's called the balance of payments. The next concept you're going to learn is the big concept in this unit, foreign exchange. It talks about the relative value of currencies to each other. Now, the first thing to understand is the idea of appreciation. This is the idea that a country's currency increases in value relative to other countries' currency, and the opposite is the idea of depreciation. Now, keep in mind the relation between appreciation, depreciation, and net exports. When your country's currency appreciates, that's going to cause your net exports of that country to fall. People are going to buy less of your stuff because it's more expensive to buy your stuff. When your currency depreciates, that's going to cause the net exports to go up. So don't get confused thinking, depreciation is a bad thing. It's not. It's actually great if you're an exporter. It's bad if you're an importer. Also understand that there's a graph here. It looks like this. This shows you the supply and demand for dollars relative to euros. So be able to draw the demand supply. Keep in mind, the demand is by, because we're analyzing, so next step sets the exchange rate. So for example, Europeans want to go on.
When one appreciates, the other depreciates relative to
dollar target fine. For one country, then they're going to demand more of that currency so they can go buy it. So that'll cause that currency to appreciate. So taste the price is really easy. Next one is income. If a country's richer, they buy more things, including things from other countries. Then there's inflation. So if the price level goes up in my country, I don't want to buy stuff in my country anymore because it's higher price. I go buy other countries' stuff. And last one is interest rates, which gets tricky. Interest rates are now the opposite of what you normally thought, all the way back in Unit 3 and Unit 4. Now when we talk about interest rates, we're saying that interest is a good thing, right? In other words, higher interest rates will bring in more inflow into your country because other countries want to get the higher rate of return. Keep in mind, two currencies can't appreciate relative to each other at the same time. So the dollar can't appreciate relative to the euro as the euro appreciates relative to the dollar. One goes up and the other one has to go down. The last thing here is the idea of floating and fixed exchange rates. Floating exchange rates allow supply and demand to set the exchange rate. A fixed exchange rate is when the government of the country tries to manipulate their currency to keep it fixed or pegged to another country's currency. Now, Unit 5 is super short and it doesn't have a lot of graphs, but I give it a 6 out of 10 difficulty because it's just so darn important. You have to understand how to get exchange rates and don't get it tripped up when you're analyzing two different countries and whether the currency appreciates or depreciates.
And that is all for this video. I'm gonna go get ready for my board meeting. You'll see me later.